Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Adam Meyerson. I'm president of the Philanthropy Roundtable, and welcome to our 16th annual National Forum on K-12 Philanthropy. Please join me in thanking again that great step performance that we just saw. And thanks to Dr. Sauls and Coach Gary and the whole STEP team for joining us. We want to thank the Walton Family Foundation, the Dulaski Foundation, and Andy and Julie Klingenstein for making this event possible. We're thrilled to be holding this event in the greater DC area. Over the last 10 years, Washington has become one of the fastest improving urban areas in education, according to the National Assessment of Educational Progress. After decades where enrollment fell in half, families are now moving to Washington because of the quality of its schools, both its district schools and its charter schools. In the last 8 years, enrollment in DC public schools has risen by 20,000, an increase of over 25%. And of course, philanthropy made all of this possible. At the Philanthropy Roundtable, we believe that the greatest advances in education are yet to come. And at this conference, we will explore how smart philanthropists can lead the way. Please join me in thanking Anthony Pienta. Anthony organized and is running this national forum, and please, Catherine Haley, can you please stand up? Catherine's our senior director of K-12 programs. Our mission at the Roundtable is to help you achieve dramatic breakthroughs in opening opportunity for all children. So anything we can do to be of assistance, let us know. We are so honored that our leadoff batter is Governor Jeb Bush. Earlier this week, it was announced that Jeb and Derek Jeter had won the rights to negotiate the purchase of the Miami Marlins. And I think the last time the Marlins won the World Series was when you were governor. But well, when Jeb was governor of Florida, the Sunshine State won the Major League Triple Crown for education reform. Thanks to Jeb's leadership in school accountability, parental choice, and the dramatic lifting of NAEP scores, especially for fourth grade reading. And as longtime chairman of the Foundation for Excellence in Education, Governor Bush has been one of America's great leaders in challenging the soft bigotry of low expectations that has been holding back millions of children. Governor Bush will share some reflections. He will then be joined by Andy Rotherham, who's joined by his two daughters here. Andy is the co-founder and partner of Bellwether Education Partners, the outstanding strategic consulting firm. He served on President Clinton's White House policy staff and the Virginia Board of Education, and he has been a prolific writer on education reform. Governor Bush, thank you so much for honoring us by speaking with us.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you, Adam. Adam and I go way back. I'm older than dirt, and he's about as old as dirt, so we go way back in the cause of caring about people and having philanthropy be engaged. Before he was here, he did extraordinary work, and it's good to see you, my friend. It's great to be here. I know that there's a no solicitation rule for the Philanthropy Roundtable, so I'm not here to hit you up for the foundation. I'm here to hit you up, though, if you want to be a limited partner in the Florida Miami Marlins. But Quick story on that. Governors, when they're in office, they normally have bets with their fellow governors. So the Marlins did make it to the World Series in the 1990s and won. And my last or second to last year as governor, there was another chance. We were playing against the Yankees, so I called up Governor Pataki and said, Pataki, it's time to bet. And he didn't think that the mighty Yankees would lose, so he said, sure, we'll bet. But he didn't say what I would get. I told him he was going to get a full Florida meal. Uh-oh. I don't like noises like that this close to the Pentagon, to be honest with you. So I told him he would get a Florida meal. It would be sent to him by Federal Express. All would be great. And he didn't tell me what he was going to give me. So Marlins beat the Yankees in 5, I think. And then I get this letter with a bunch of food. And he says, enclosed are 38 apples grown in New York, the best apples in the world, symbolizing the 38 pennants that the mighty Yanks have won in their illustrious system. And also you'll see that there are 26 Nathan hot dogs representing the World Series that the incredible New York Yankees have won. So I wrote him back a handwritten note saying, George, thanks so much for the food. The staff ate it up really quick. The hot dogs particularly were great. Based on the math, the Marlins have won 2 World Series in 10 years, higher percentage than the mighty Yanks. Thank you very much. So it's great to be here. I thought I would start with a quote from James Garfield. My mom is still the honorary chairman of the foundation for the Barbara Bush Foundation for Family Literacy. I'm not here to solicit for them either, but we have an annual event in Naples, Florida, where people come and talk about their books. I thought at first that this would be a really boring thing to do, but it's actually a lot of fun to hear people talk about how they get to where they are, how they write the books they write, why they're passionate about it. And so the woman who wrote this book wrote about James Garfield, someone who was not on my top 10 list of great presidents, but now he is. He's a phenomenal guy, and I recommend the book to you. But this is a quote from James Garfield that I think symbolizes why your involvement in education reform and philanthropy really matters. There is no horizontal stratification of society in this country, Garfield wrote. This is in the 19th century. Like the rocks in the earth, that hold one class down below forevermore, and let another come to the surface to stay there forever. Our stratification is like the ocean, where every individual drop is free to move, and where from the sternest depths of the mighty deep, any drop may come up to glitter on the highest wave that rolls. Wow. You know, you talk about what goes on in politics today, and it's kind of putrid, it's kind of poisonous, it's kind of, it's not about the things it should be, and we seem to have gridlock, mostly in Washington, but across the country as well. But that definition of America at its best, I think, is something that we need to be reminded about. Because the world we're moving towards will demand that we do so. America at its best, it doesn't matter where you start. It's what you do. It's what you do to earn your success. And if people don't have the skills to earn their success, then there are going to be a lot of drops down below. And the stratification in our society that we're now seeing is a direct result of our inability to make sure that everybody has the right to rise in our society. Here's the problem. That's always a problem in a country like America where we do it much better from the bottom up, where people can pursue their dreams and do extraordinary things, where we're not getting in line and being told what to do. The problem today is that a child born in a public hospital in Miami or Baltimore or in this great city will never get a job unless there's something that changes the direction that their life will go. They'll never have a job. Because we're seeing the wiping out of literally millions of jobs. It's at a pace that's kind of not that fast. We don't necessarily watch it with our, kind of on a peripheral vision. But read the paper with a mindset of what's going on in the world, and you'll begin to realize that the world we're moving towards, we're already there. And the world we're moving towards is going to be a world that will have deep stratification unless we change how we assure that people, young people, have the chance to achieve earned success. And the only way they can do it in the world we're moving into and the world we're moving towards is a higher quality education. So let's start with the premise that let's stop the political argument that people on the outside say that the public school system stinks, and people inside the public school system says it's fantastic. That's a false choice. That's an argument that's irrelevant. What we should do is start with the premise that if you think it's great, it needs to get greater. If you think it's okay, it needs to get great. And if you think it is failing, as it is for too many children, in my opinion, then you have to believe also that it has to get better. We should converge on that notion, because building a system of education for millions of young people based on a model of the 20th century, when the world has moved at warp speed way beyond that, is a fool's errand. It is a total fool's errand. That's why what you do is important. The Philanthropy Roundtable and its members do big things because you're the R&D arm of education in the 21st century. If you think 13,100 government-run, unionized monopolies is the source of innovation for educating children, then I respectfully disagree. Yes, there are great examples of superintendents willing to challenge the old order of things. Yes, there are people inside of our school systems doing extraordinary work, but they're not designed to create the innovative climate. The people from the outside that have big and caring hearts are, and you all play a huge role. Think about this. Do you think Sal Khan teaching his nephew and then his nieces and his apparently had a pretty big family before he figured out that the internet might be a better way of doing this. Do you think Sal Khan could have achieved what he did if he was working inside of a school district? He would have, if he had won the lottery and found someone inside the school district that was extraordinary and said, I'll protect you, I'll break all the rules for you, maybe. But the simple fact is, there'd be some committee formed. Someone would say, you're not certified to teach, what the hell are you doing? We have to approve every one of your formulas. We have to approve all of these things from the top down, because God forbid if you make a mistake. And lo and behold, a guy like Sal Khan now has, without any government support, all from philanthropy. Thank God that Andor met him, and then thank God Bill Gates went to a conference and said he would plow in a bunch of money, and off he went. That's what we need. And your role, I think, is to play the role of tearing down barriers, of being the R&D arm for the next generation of how we educate, and being vigilant to make sure that the rest of us are focused on what works rather than defending what doesn't. I, for one, now at the age of 64, am too impatient to wait for this to happen incrementally. Because what I know to be true is that the next generation of precious children aren't going to live a life of purpose and meaning unless they do far better than what is expected of them today. I hope you'll stay the course. I hope you'll be big and bold. I hope that you tear down the barriers. And this old guy will be with you. And if you're down in Miami, starting next spring, come and visit the next World Series champs, the Miami Marlins. Thank you. I told that joke, by the way, to Pataki joke, saying to Derek, and I said, not all Yankees are arrogant. You're the most humble guy I've ever met, so kudos to number 2.
Yeah, I have to say, Governor, I was surprised that, like, of all the fields you went into, you decided to pick another one after education, where it kind of goes on forever. We argue about balls and strikes. There's often no fixed rules, and when it doesn't go well, we just throw the ball at each other.
That's true. It's a good game.
It's a wonderful game, actually. So I'm really glad to be here, and I want to thank Catherine, Adam, and Anthony, who didn't blink when I said, I'm really excited to do this. Chance to talk with Governor Bush. Education is always terrific, but it's take your daughter to work day, and I'm going to have two assistants with me. And they didn't blink. They said, sure, just go ahead and bring them. But I'm worried after today and all the things we've done today, they basically think this job is you go around to different things and you talk about baseball.
It's probably be Olympic gold medalists too, right?
That's probably a big takeaway, yeah. That and Olympic gold medalists. So that was a terrific sort of setup of where we are. I wanted to start with a question for you, though. On education reform specifically, you've got this sort of poisonous situation nationally that you talked about, yet states are passing there's all this interesting legislation passing that really isn't getting a lot of attention, probably because of the toxic politics. Like, where are we? Like, the education reform movement, if you will, like, how would you handicap it politically right now? Where are we?
There's been really some interesting bills passed, and then you've got to have a governor willing to bang heads to implement faithfully the laws that are passed, and you got to have rules on top of that. And there's some success stories. I mean, I would say Governor Ducey in Arizona has just passed an ESA bill that is just extraordinary. If you follow the school choice movement, this is Brian Sandoval and he have probably broken into new terrain. But when you put a cap on the expenditures, and it's slow incremental progress, it's better than defending what we have perhaps, but we need to figure out how do we get way beyond where we are. And I see Giselle here, who is a big advocate of competency-based learning, where you master the material, you move on. You could envision if we weren't stuck in the system, Andy, that we have today, we would have a different system. If we could, the great joy in life would be if you could always start over knowing what you know, not having all the legacy costs associated with everything that's around what we did before. Man, it would be a lot of fun, first of all, and it would be a lot more effective than what we have. We haven't had that breakthrough moment yet. Maybe I'm a little frustrated and impatient about it. Others would herald the great successes that are going on, and there's some good ones for sure. It's just, I think we need to find a place where irrefutable progress is made that's tangible for people to see, that's not ideological or not political, and people go, wow, this is what we need to do. And it hadn't happened yet. Hopefully it will.
And what's it going to take let's talk about that. I mean, something you said once that has stayed with me is we were talking for a Time magazine feature. This was years ago, and you were talking about your experience in Florida, and you said, my politics, you said, your exact words were, you said, I could do my politics elsewhere. You basically were saying education was kind of thankless in terms of your own politics, but you were able to do your politics electorally and what you needed to do to be a successful politician elsewhere. And that stayed with me, because that seems like that's, first of all, we haven't created the conditions for politicians, and likewise for innovators, like a lot of superintendents. You were saying, like, there's not a lot of risk takers because, like, you don't get rewarded for that.
That's true.
So what do you, like, thinking politically, sort of large scale, what does it take and what can the people in this room do to help sort of start to change that situation so that the average politician says, oh, I want to go do that?
In this environment, that's tough, because you're punished more than you're applauded. The downside seems, it's perceived at least, I don't know if this is true or not, but everybody, if you're in elected office today, it seems like you're looking at, you're looking at behind you, worried that someone's going to come take you out. If you're a Democrat, you're worried about a challenge on the left. If you're a Republican, you're worried about a challenge on the right. And so there's a perception that there isn't great gains politically, personally, that you can have by doing maybe what you think is the right thing. So my own personal experience was that we did a lot of big things when I was governor. I got reelected not because of them, and I left with a 67% approval rate, not necessarily because of them, but people respected me for, like, having a view and acting on it and having the cojones to stick with it. The best compliment a politician should want to have is for someone to come up to them and say, I didn't like what you did, but I knew where you stood, or you stood your ground, or you did what you thought was right. It's rewarding that effort that seems to be lacking right now, or there's a perception of it. In the places outside of DC, it looks like, I think there are examples of principle-centered leadership where there's rewards. I'd say, certainly, Governor Ducey is very popular, and he's doing bold things. Hickenlooper in Colorado, as a Democrat, I think is very popular, and he's doing things that break the norm for Democrat leadership. He works across the aisle whenever possible. Most governors try to do that. So depending on the circumstance, there are rewards for doing this. But there is a strange thing. John Cartley's here from Florida, and here is the best example of how to go about this the right way. As a conservative Republican, by creating an environment where there was a lot more private school choice, for example, in charter schools, the primary beneficiaries were children of Democrat constituents. So there was no direct reward per se, and suburban families may feel threatened because somehow they're told over and over again, you're taking money away from my school to help another school in a far off part of town. And what John has done with a lot of friends is build a constituency of moms and dads in the community that benefit from it. And there is a left-right coalition that is really strong in Florida, not many other places, and that's what needs to be built. It needs to be parent-driven more than anything else. And that takes time and it takes work, it takes patience, but it has to be done.
So staying on that theme, you talked about how John sort of organized into the politics. One of the things I think is so striking after this last election is you saw sort of really big movement with two groups. So rural voters, Trump basically had them locked down. And I mean, you can then say everyone's got their handy heuristic in this town, like your distance from a Starbucks or an Uber predicted your vote. And then college-educated voters made a pretty strong move as well. And you can't help but miss in this field, we don't have a lot to say to either of those groups as education reformers. So you've got these two groups that are sort of living at the fulcrum, and we don't necessarily have a lot to say to them. Like, what would be your political advice for you? We talk about, you were talking about Hassel's work on competency, which should have appeal. Khan Academy is obviously used in suburbs across the country now. Like, what's your advice for how do we start to build a politics that gets back towards sort of exactly what John did, but on a much larger scale?
Well, and I think bottom up is a better way to think about this than top down. Until the swamp is drained around here, Washington is not going to be a place where great things happen on education policy.
Well, how's that going?
I don't know. I watch a lot of ESPN these days, Andy. I'm not following the cable news shows that just drive me nuts because they just over and over the same thing over and over again, and there's no substance in the conversation. So I'm not surprised people aren't embracing any kind of provocative thinking because it's never talked about. So Common Core apparently is bad. Got that. School choice is either good or it's bad. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, a third of our kids are college and/or career ready after spending more per student than any country in the world. There's a little bit of a deeper conversation that has to go on, and I'm not counting on the cable news network, any one of them, whatever one you like, or Washington, D.C. politicians, or people around here that make a good living off of the swamp. I don't think that's the source of hope. I think it's with great superintendents, great mayors, great governors trying to change things and sticking with it where they should be rewarded. It ought to be a bottom-up kind of approach. And frankly, when you all make your investing, you're not focused on, federal policy is important, the reauthorization of the Education Act, that's important. But what's really important are those kids that we saw before we got up here. What's really important are high-performing charter schools, or the reinvigoration of Catholic education in America, or digital learning that really matters, or Lindsay, the Lindsay school district in California that has moved to a competency-based model. That's the stuff that really matters, and none of that is really touched by what goes on in Washington.
And so I want to make sure to put a point on this. Are you being heard? You're saying go local. Are you saying, in essence, if you start to build the good things, the politics will take care of themselves? Or are you saying do the politics and the good work more at the local level and sort of ignore this circus that we have going on here?
Look, what's the percentage of education spending that comes from Washington? 10% now? 12%? Focus on the 88%, dude. It's like...
But are you saying focus on the politics or focus on building things? Like,
I think you need to build coalitions driven by parents that demand that their child gets the same quality education as they define it, as someone else who they perceive as getting a better deal. I think we ought to, this should be, it's an economic issue, it's a social justice issue. The reform, we need to get back to a left-right coalition that is not ideologically driven, that recognizes how important this work is for the next generation of time before we're all bemoaning the fact that people can't find jobs forever, not just temporarily. And then we'll have the argument, Giselle, that you and I started, which is we'll just give people just give them a check. The dignity of work is one of the most powerful things in a person's life. It creates order, it creates stronger families, it validates people. And if we get to the point where, hey, we're so prosperous because we're so productive, because we have all these really cool innovations and technologies and robotics and artificial intelligence and big data, all this stuff is so great, we don't have to worry about all the 80% of the people that are just going to be floundering. That is going to be so dangerous for our country. The social costs of that are inexplicable. And for the folks that embrace technology, and many of you invest in it, in philanthropy, don't buy the notion that somehow it always works, that technological innovation brings about more productivity and higher income. It could be actually that this time it's different. And I sense it is. I'll give you one quick example, because I'm a little obsessed about this, as you can tell. UPS, think of all the data UPS has. Every truck, GPS laden, they know exactly where every truck is. They can follow and track every package. They can follow all this. They mined all this data and determined that it was better not to take a left turn, unless you're in the UK, of course, where right turns are prohibited. No left turns. You won't find a truck taking a left turn in UPS trucks. It's counterintuitive to me. I always try to take the left turn to get home quicker if that's where I was going. But what they found was in 1 year's time, the annualized savings of carbon emissions, if that if that rocks your world, tremendous tonnage reduction in carbon emission, savings of costs and gasoline costs, and 1,000 fewer trucks. Great. UPS goes right to the bottom line. Increased productivity is wonderful. Maybe they'll lower their costs for the next package that comes to my house. But there are 1,000 fewer truck drivers. You take every instance of every innovation that's taking place, it's possible that the next, there may be a foreman of the fewer truck drivers that may make more, but it's possible that we're not even going to have truck drivers. So what do? Do we sit back and wait for that crisis and the social strife that comes? Or we say, enough of this. We need a 21st century governance structure around a 21st century world to assure that 21st century children have a fighting chance. And to me, that would be the better place to fight this fight than kind of going, let's go back to the future and fight the fight like we were Hubert Humphrey and, Barry Goldwater or something, like the 1960s. Great men, great time, wonderful time in America. Nothing that is going on now has any resemblance to what happened then. But we're still fighting over structures and governance and how we organize politically as though we were living in 1972.
Well, actually, stay on that. This is a great, because I wanted to ask you very specifically, like, what should education reformers, people trying to build these coalitions, be saying? I mean, there's tremendous economic anxiety out there in the country, and like the people we're like aiming at, third graders, for instance, are going to, there's several presidential cycles before they're even going to be voting. So like the people who are feeling this right now,
they have a big safe zone for a while. Is that what
exactly.
You're saying?
The people are saying who are experiencing this right now, adults, like what should we be saying to them, and which education reformers, how should we be talking to them? Because obviously, as we saw this last cycle, there's just tremendous anxiety in the land about exactly what people, even if they don't know the details, they intuitively understand what you're talking about.
I think there's not one approach to this. I think there are 3 or 4 big ones. One is empowering families, particularly moms, to be much more, have more information, to make informed choices and give them the power to make those choices is really important. That is a powerful value that people appreciate and understand. Nothing else in life are you assigned to a school because of your zip code. And so the argument against that, I don't think, is a winning argument over the long haul. The question of social justice is an important one as well. It's not the winning one for everybody, but it's an important one for me, and I know it's important for your work, and we shouldn't ignore that. The simple fact is we're already at the place where there's 2 Americas, and one of the key determinants of which side of that divide you're on is whether you have gained the power of knowledge through a quality education. That seems to be clear, and that seems to be another place where you could have a coalition. And then you need to make this an economic imperative, not just for those that in an emerging underclass where people are stuck at the bottom, but also for a whole lot of other people that have economic anxiety and sense that this isn't getting any better. All the call centers, Anybody that thought my son is going to be a lawyer, I'm so proud, he got to law school, that's a loser. The cost of it, it's a profit center for higher education striving to maintain its medieval governance structure, to be honest with you, not 20th century. That's a big profit center, but how many kids are going to get a job in a law firm when you can automate most of the basic functions of what it is to be a lawyer, or accounting, or call centers, or truck drivers, or almost across the board now, much of this is being challenged. And so I think making a compelling case about the economic imperative of this, it's not the wall. It's not Mexico. It's not China and the 45% tariff that is going to solve this problem. That's a symbol of, and a very effective one in terms of marketing, of appealing to people's angst. The answer to this is not to turn back and think you can go back to the 1970s or to create walls, whether they're trade walls or walls around the country. The answer is to make sure people are equipped, each person, individually, from the bottom up, to be successful, to achieve earned success. That's the answer, and that should be, those 3 points, I think, is where we need to spend more time kind of creating coalitions. Because if not, you get into the political realm and it's ugly. It's one gigantic food fight. I'll just, one other editorial comment. I'm near our nation's capital, but not inside of it. Betsy DeVos has a heart for kids. She is totally all in. I assume she was a member of the Philanthropy Roundtable. I can't imagine she wasn't. Yeah, okay. So I rest my case. I mean, she is just like this phenomenal, big-hearted, caring person. And to be demonized because she didn't fit the mold of what a secretary of the Department of Education should be is a good example of where we are politically, particularly here in Washington. And I think we need to reject that and find new avenues to build coalitions again, and I hope and I believe Betsy will be an ally in that. I think she'll will be helpful in that regard.
And so you think, and I mean, Dave had trouble articulating an argument that she seems the politics here, as you said, are poisonous. You think at some point things are going to calm down and she's going to be able to make that kind of argument and try to bring people together, or is it just, I mean, granted it's only been 100 days, but honestly, it sure does feel like a lot longer. And so, will this settle down to where she can make that argument, or what do you think we're looking at? I mean, I'm asking you as a political pro.
If you're looking for therapy, I'd say more ESPN, a little less
They just fired
Morning Joe or whatever you want.
They just fired everyone.
I know. For the same damn reason, by the way. We're going through this massive transformation in mainstream media as well, and ESPN is probably the most mainstream of all media, but for the same reason. So the world is changing. I think she will be an advocate for building coalitions from the bottom up. And I don't think you need much from Washington more than understanding the challenge and the importance of higher quality education, from early literacy all the way through. And she has the potential where, my advice to her, and she hasn't asked for it, if you see her, if she comes to the meeting, you can share this advice or claim it, would be focus on the things where Washington has a disproportionate say. So Title I reform, making sure there's accountability there, dealing with children with learning disabilities, dealing with the student loan crisis, which is a pathetic example of how we can't organize ourselves out of a wet paper bag anymore. I mean, the government took over the student loan program and it's now $1.3 trillion. It's doubled in less than 6 years. Default rates going through the roof. Recourse debt on the backs of people that can't get jobs after they get these degrees they think are relevant. And we haven't reformed it. So if she could play a constructive role there, I think it's helpful. And then be a partner with people that really, whether they're inside our government or not, at the local level that want to try things different.
And I want to bring the audience in a second, drilling down a little bit on policy. There's a raging debate has broken out, we've always had the debate about choice versus accountability, and now we're having a debate that's breaking out around choice sort of within accountability. You were a leader for a long time, and that states needed to have very concise accountability systems with a summative grade that parents could understand around the dinner table, not these elaborate matrix like what California has that, even the wonks struggle to get their heads around, let alone some parent trying to make heads or tails.
I think it's designed for that reason that way.
It may well be. It's designed, it's definitely not designed to have clarity. How do you think, like in this current environment, both where we are substantively on reform and the politics, like what's your advice for people on sort of navigating these currents on both choice and accountability?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a question I haven't been asked because I don't show up a lot of the gatherings where you'd have divergent views on this subject. I'm not a big fan when when you have a group of people who you can almost count on, obviously more than one hand, that are in the school reform movement. It isn't like this gigantic group, just for the record here. We're not talking about millions of people that wake up each day saying, how can I organize my life a little bit to assure that we tear down barriers for better learning? That's just, it's not a big group. And for our small group, passionate as it is, to break ourselves up in disparate parts seems pretty stupid, just to be blunt about it, and counterproductive. The other team doesn't seem to have this problem. They crush anybody that disagrees with them. Bam, it's over. And we're fighting over little things that just really don't, how do you argue about pointy-headed things like learning gains? How do you measure it and all this stuff? I mean, there's a legitimate argument you can have, but it shouldn't divide us in the broader question, which is how do we form coalitions around assuring that each child gets a year's worth of knowledge in a year's time? How you measure it, the accountability around it, the offerings, whether they're public or private, all those things are important, but the bigger mission is how do we change the system overall? And so I'm a little disillusioned by the fighting amongst ourselves. And then the arguing in the philanthropy community of people, I mean, you guys must just get you must get tiring as well, where you're hearing people argue on the nuance rather than be together on the bigger things to fight. I'm in the fighting mode here. I'm not into the, arguing on the little things. I don't think we have the luxury of time on this.